Welcome to the Grow Strong Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Meredith Bell, and I interview business leaders who are committed to their own growth and the development of everyone on their team. If you enjoy my podcast, be sure to subscribe and rate it on your favorite podcast platform. Welcome back to another episode of the Grow Strong Leaders podcast. I'm your host, Meredith Bell. You know, as humans, we are hardwired to resist change and seek certainty, but that leaves us ill-equipped to thrive in our rapidly changing world. With me today is someone who has studied and researched resilience throughout his entire career, and you're going to learn a lot about becoming change-proof, which just happens to be the title of his latest book. I'd like to welcome to my show, Adam Markel. Welcome, Adam.
Oh my goodness, Meredith! Thank you so much for having me as a guest. It's I've been looking forward to this. This is a pleasure.
I am too, and I want to give a shout out to Janine Hamner-Holman, who's the one who introduced us. And I just feel like I've gotten to know you, Adam, through our conversations earlier, and also through your book. It's just an amazing book. And I want to introduce you more formally to my audience before we jump into a conversation about some of my favorite parts in your book.
I love it. You've gotten to know me a little bit, and you're still willing to talk to me.
Yes, even more so.
Thank you for that.
Adam is a best-selling author, keynote speaker, and workplace expert. The full title of his new book is Change Proof: Leveraging the Power of Uncertainty to Build Long-Term Resilience. Adam is also the CEO of More Love Media and host of the Change Proof podcast. He's a sought-after business culture catalyst who inspires, empowers, and guides organizations and individuals to create sustainable, high-performance strategies. And we're going to learn some of those specific strategies today. Adam, I loved so many of the tips. And, you know, I've read lots and lots of books over the years, and yours is the best, hands down, around the topic of resilience that I've ever seen. Well, I don't want to jump into resilience immediately, though. I want you to take us to your experience as a lifeguard at Jones Beach on Long Island. You had that role, I think, for 8 years, and you open with such a compelling story that takes us there immediately. And there were so many lessons from that have kind of laid the groundwork of so much of the work you do today. So please share with my audience more about that experience.
Well, I kind of thought you might ask me about that. So I just happened to have on my desk a whistle. Now, it's not just any old whistle. It's my actual whistle from when I was 19 years old. And as you said, I started working at a place called Jones Beach, which for people that are familiar with New York's coastline, it's the part of Long Island that faces the Atlantic Ocean. It's quite an active place. Like the Jersey Shore, if you've ever been there, is kind of a narrow strip of sand, and down in Florida, same thing, kind of narrow in places. But Jones Beach is really wide. It's a long walk from the boardwalk or the parking lot to the water, and what that means is that on a summer day, on a hot day, back when I was lifeguarding at this particular place, you would get more people on a half a mile stretch of sand than you could imagine, meaning upwards of 100,000 people on that body of sand. Because Field 4, which is where I worked, was where the buses would stop. So people from the city, people came from all the boroughs in New York City and elsewhere to come and spend a beautiful day in a beautiful place. And a lot of those people that came to the beach were not swimmers, were not strong swimmers. Many of them had not been in the ocean before, or if they had, you know, it wasn't a thing they did all the time. And that beach was dangerous in the sense that there were rip currents that lifeguards used to refer to as sucks, S-U-C-K-S, because what would happen is that everything that would sort of get sucked out to deeper water when these rip currents would present themselves, and we could see a suck or see a rip current from the lifeguard stand, because it changed the color of the water. So we'd be up in our lifeguard towers and our stands, et cetera, looking at this sea of people, literally a sea of people within this ocean. And these rip currents that would move, they would move up and down the coast from east to west and west to east. They didn't stay in the same place. They would appear and then they would disappear. And people could be standing in 3 feet of water, and in the next minute, they'd be in like 7 feet or 8 feet of water and being sucked out into deeper water. And what so I won't get into the whole story today, but we would communicate with one another on the beach with whistles. That's how lifeguards would speak, because you couldn't, we didn't use walkie-talkies or anything back then. And so the whistles had meaning. And a single whistle was a way to get somebody's attention. 2 whistles meant that we were in a rescue, going to actually get off the lifeguard stand and run a rescue, which we were doing constantly on the bigger surf days. And 3 whistles, you very rarely ever heard. 3 whistles meant that there was a submersion. 3 whistles was a shock to the system, because you knew something was really, really wrong, that somebody was missing, was out of sight. And so on this particular day when I was 19 years old, we heard these 3 whistles. We went down to our main stand, and the captain of our field, who was in charge, let us know what had happened. At the next field over, about a half a mile run, there was a submersion, and we needed to mobilize all of our crew and get down there. We closed our beach. We ran down. We ran a search and rescue operation for more than an hour, even though, and that is, we were diving down, 10, 12 feet below the surface, which is very, very cold in the Atlantic Ocean, even in the middle of the summer, and then trying to find this individual working a particular search pattern. And we, unfortunately, that day did not. And so it was really a tragic situation. Something I will never forget was the sight of this family grieving. It was just brutal, honestly. And when the search was over, after more than an hour, we were all shivering and blue. We got out of the water. Our captain led us in a moment of silence. And then when we opened our eyes, he said some words to us, which I'll never forget. He said, nobody's going to go down in our water. Nobody's going to go down on our watch, was what he said. And then he finished it off by telling us that, and this was sort of a mantra or a call to action. He said, you either make the save to all of us, or you die trying. Really, really an intense thing. I mean, it was a very intense moment. And at that moment, we had to get back up in our lifeguard stands, Meredith, as if absolutely nothing had happened, because now people were getting back in the water. They were going to continue on with their day, and we were expected to be there to save when it was time, when it was required. And there is a lot that we can unpack out of that. I'll just say it immediately, we had to be resilient, which is funny to use that word, because we wouldn't have used that word then. We had to learn how to be resilient individually and collectively as a crew, as a team that day, to go forward. And we did. And I'll close a loop on that story just to say that, fortunately, while I was a middle school English teacher for some years, and I went back to school, became a lawyer. So for about 7 more summers after that, I got the good fortune of working at that same beach. And from that day forward, we never had anybody go down on our watch. We never lost anybody again. And so we were 20 lifeguards on thousands and thousands of people, many of whom were in the water at the same time, with this changeable environment, always changing everything, the tides, the sun, the wind, you name it. And we were impeccable. And so part of what I share with people today, and part of the through line for this book, Change Proof, is really the lessons that I learned starting at 19 years old as a result of that tragedy. And the central metaphor of the book is the rip current itself, because, as you pointed out really well, stated at the beginning, people resist change. And I liken it to the way when we were on the lifeguard stand and someone was caught in a rip current, that their first response typically was to resist it, to try to swim against the current. And I don't care how good a swimmer, how great a swimmer you are, even swimmers that were of the caliber that, that many of us were at, you cannot fight that rip current. You will not be able to fight it without exhausting yourself. So people would start to do that. They fight the current, they fight it until they do become depleted, exhausted, and then they become dangerous. And that's when we would get in the water, realizing that they're about to spend themselves. And then after they've spent, they will become, the fear will set in, they'll become panicked. And that's when they're truly potentially a harm to themselves and people around them. And so that's when we make a save. And so that's the central metaphor of this book, is the fact that change is ever present. It's often unpredictable, and at times it is very predictable. But in either event, resisting change is not a recipe for success. And there are a lot of other ways and other strategies you can use to leverage change as a catalyst for growth. And we can talk more about that as well.
Yeah, that the metaphor certainly does get woven throughout the book, and it's a powerful reminder to us, I think, about the dangers of resisting and trying to work against the reality that you're facing in that moment. I was just thinking about one of the sentences in your book that really stuck with me, and that was, you don't practice resilience, you perform resilience. And, when we think about developing a skill, whether it's a communication skill or a skill like resilience, thinking of practicing it is how you get better. So I'd love for you to share, what's the distinction you make between practicing and performing?
Well, it to me, it's not semantics. They're related, but they're different. And practice is something that is vitally important in so many endeavors where you wish to get good at something. But ultimately, the greatest learnings come from real life experience, from being in game conditions, etc. And performing resilience is actually using the skills, is actually using the kind of things that produce resilience in the midst of chaos. And because it's through that performance that you actually learn what works, what doesn't work, what could be done differently. So you have your own feedback loop that's baked into when you're performing. I like golf, and practice is very important in golf. But the only way to play good golf is to perform good golf. And you can apply it to anything else. So practice is vital, and I use it, and it's one of those tools that we have at our disposal. But to know how I play golf or play tennis or any other thing sports related, as an example, I have to get feedback from real conditions, and you can't really produce what it feels like to be performing under pressure, except when you're performing under pressure.
Mm-hmm. No, I get that. It's you're faced with a situation to have that resilience. And one of the things that I really like in the structure of your book is you've got your basic 3 steps, and those get applied to 4 different areas of life: the mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional. And so I would love for you to start by talking about, what are those 3 steps, and how did you determine those are the 3 essential ones that can serve us in these different areas?
Yeah. And I'm a lover of language. I know you are as well, Meredith. So to me, the language is important. And I love how you refer to those 3 steps as essential. And they're not basic. They're not easy. In fact, the first step is to pause. So in any situation, whether you're leading a team of 1, or you're leading a team of thousands, or you're a leader in your own life, and in whatever situation you might find yourself in where there's a challenge, the first step is to pause. And That's not basic at all. It sounds basic. It's essential because so many people have a difficult time in pausing. In fact, it is harder for most people, I find, to do nothing than it is to do something. So doing nothing, it's especially in the midst of something that feels chaotic or something that feels threatening to you, whatever that change might be, that rip current that you feel, it's essential that you pause. And the purpose of the pause is manifold. I'll just share a couple of the things because it's such a deep practice to pause. You're pausing to get to a place of neutrality, in my view, which is to say, this is not good, this is not bad, this is not right, this is not wrong, this is not fair, this is not unfair. In doing that, you're doing something really powerful, which is to remove your attachment, to remove expectations around that attachment, to let go of those things. It creates a state of equanimity that's possible even in the midst of a very challenging moment. But you have to consciously decide, I'm gonna take a beat here. And that's literally taking a pause, taking a breath, and then being conscious about, okay, can I get myself to a place where I'm not judging whatever's happening? Because that really is what produces that equanimity, that peacefulness, even in chaos, that being the eye of the storm, so to speak, is that I'm not judging the situation. So that's the first step, is to pause. The second one is to ask. And questions are such a powerful tool that, again, what I find with leaders that we work with, that our company Workwell spends a lot of time working with leaders, very senior level, as well as in the organizations that listen to us. We work with a lot of middle manager people, which is not often where resources are allocated, as you probably know in your own experience too. Questions are very powerful as a tool. And first of all, there's a cause and effect relationship between the question and the answer. So for folks that are looking for answers, maybe the reason you haven't gotten answers to things that you're looking to have answers for is that you haven't asked questions already. A lot of times people won't ask questions that make them feel less smart than they'd like to feel, or they're kind of humbling questions. They involve a certain amount of humility, or they're really big questions that they have no ready answer for. So it's difficult sometimes to ask a question, and then in the heat of the moment, and I'll give you some examples. A great question is, and this was one that someone introduced me to years ago: what don't I see? What a marvelous question. My wife, Randy, she will remind me of this question: what's the creative opportunity in this moment? What is, how do I want to experience myself being at this moment? There's any number of questions that you can ask. Is this useful? Whatever it might, and the list goes on and on and on. So you get to the place where you ask questions with the understanding that because it's a law, it's a law as much as it is a physical law, in my opinion, that when you ask a question, you receive an answer. Now, you don't always get an answer immediately, and sometimes it takes a long time. And if you ask a really deep question about life or about the universe, it may take you a long time to get an answer. But my experience is that questions don't go unanswered. So you ask. And the next piece, pause, you ask, and then you choose. So as opposed to starting with, I need to know what to do, I need to implement a plan, I need to mobilize and take action. I was just interviewed the other day by a business periodical in Philadelphia about the bridge collapse that occurred. And just most recently, when a Singapore cargo ship ran into a bridge that toppled the bridge and lives were lost, et cetera. And we were having this conversation with regard to all the ripple effect that now this bridge accident has created. And so we want to mobilize immediately. And my hesitation, or what I recommend that leaders refrain from doing, would be to skip to that mobilization too quickly. to skip to the action or the plan too quickly.
Yeah.
We all have time. You always have time for the pause and for the ask so that you can then choose. And you have so many choices once you've gone through those first two steps, including one choice that's counterintuitive, which is to do nothing, which is to recover. Because as we'll get into what defines resilience in our research, it's quite a bit different than what we might hear from others, even that write or speak about resilience, is this concept of how we recover. And that ultimately it's recovery that produces greater performance, greater agility, adaptability, longevity, all those things that we all want. So sometimes what we have to choose to do is to actually do something for ourselves, to go into recovery mode, or for our teams as well. A period of self-care or a period of recovery. Lots of ways that we can talk about it in that respect. But that's the pause, ask, choose. And that's the three steps that are sort of filtered throughout the book, Change Proof, all against the backdrop that we are holistic. We're not one-dimensional beings. Our world is not one-dimensional. And so we have to see it through the lens of things being mental, emotional, physical, and even spiritual. And so we're holistic, and those four areas are constantly being activated in our experience. And that's why when we think about how it is that we do recover and apply that pause, ask, choose methodology, we have to think of it in terms of those four areas as well.
And I want to get into your assessment, but first I want to go back to your talking about recovery, because one of the key things that you said was a lot of times you need to have recovery before it becomes critical. And you used a wonderful story with the dogs, the sled dogs, and how the person who is driving them has to recognize in advance when they need to stop, and it's before they get exhausted. And so talk a little bit about how can we recognize when recovery is the next thing we ought to focus on or we need to address.
Yeah, that's really an easy question. And first of all, the lady's name is Blair Braverman. She's an Alaskan sled dog musher, and it's just a remarkable learning that we get from her in regard to her dogs, these beautiful huskies and malamutes, and they run in races like the Iditarod, which is 1,000 miles through Alaska. It's remarkable. She has to stop them about every 4 hours, and the story goes, she puts down a blanket, and sometimes the dogs won't even lay down. Meredith, they stand there and they will bark at her, howl at her like she's out of her flipping mind, because they want to run. That's all they want to do. But she understands that if she just lets them run, even though it's in their DNA and that's what they want, that they'll run and they'll run and they'll run until they run out of gas. And at that point, they can't win the race because they need a lot of time to recover. So she stops them before they know they're tired. She feeds them before they know they're hungry. She gives them water before they know that they are even thirsty. And this is a very important lesson for leaders, because we have to recognize not only that we sometimes drive our teams like we're a sled dog musher, and people don't love being mushed, but let's just say it like it is. People are used to it. It's part of the paradigm of work that still doesn't work, which is why years ago we started working on the work well concepts for that reason. But even if we're driving teams, as we will and we must on some level to meet the stakeholders' expectations, we have to understand that our teams can't go relentlessly. And the pandemic showed us that, taught us that. We're seeing the signs of that. I'm going to get to that in a second. But we have to recognize that even if our people are willing to be like those sled dogs and run and run and run, at some point they're going to run out. And then the depletion, the exhaustion, and even the injury will be tougher to recover from, as opposed to learning this lesson that we have to have their backs. We have to take care of people, even if they don't know, frankly, how best to take care of themselves. And so, this is fundamentally important. As you said, we have to create resilience before we need it. And we have to recognize that this paradigm of grit is not the correct It's not it. This is not what the resilience looks like in the world we live in today. You cannot win a marathon that has no end. And so our goal in our work, and hopefully people are getting this now through our conversation, is that you want to crush it. We all want to crush it. You just want to crush it without crushing your people in the process. And that's what leaders still don't know. Honestly, that's what leaders have yet to learn. And so they still drive their people in ways that they wouldn't, even if they were driven that way and it helped and that they've succeeded, notwithstanding that, they are yet to, many of them are yet to recognize that this is not a recipe for long-term success.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we see the signs everywhere. It's what you asked. The signs are everywhere. Anxiety is at levels we've never tracked before. Social psychologists are talking about this everywhere, and depression and suicidal ideation. And then beyond, like coming down from those extremes, when I'm delivering a keynote like I did this morning in a virtual platform, and I ask the question, what are the signs of burnout that you see among your colleagues, friends, coworkers, maybe even the person who's sitting in your seat? It was immediate. They put in the chat immediately: apathy, anxiety, anger, lack of patience, making mistakes, alcoholism and other substance abuse. The signs are all around us that people cannot be driven this hard without the necessary recovery. And that's what we talk about in terms of resilience. It's less about grit. Even though you got to be gritty, you got to know how to grind. I mean, these are important things. They're not the fundamental. It's not the tip of the spear. Endurance is not the thing we're after anymore. It's less about how we endure and more about how we restore, which provides greater capacity and productivity over time. And the funny part too, Meredith, is that in studies that have looked at the highest performing business people in the world, and the highest performing athletes, as an example, in the world, Olympic gold medalists, professional athletes, the one thing these two very different groups have in common actually are their rituals. Their rituals for recovery. That's what they all have in common: mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually speaking. They know how to recover because that's how they get greater performance from themselves.
That is so, so important. So share some of the rituals that you've seen work well, or that you recommend and see work well with clients, where you or the managers, let's say you've been brought in because they're sensing things aren't, going well. They're seeing these signs that you just described. And so I'm imagining some of my listeners saying, oh, I see that same thing in my workplace or in myself. So I think it would be a real service to them to share just a couple of things that they might do to help themselves and others take care of themselves better and take time for that recovery that's so important.
Yeah. I first started to adopt this method based on some mentoring that I did some years ago. So I delivered a TED Talk, and I tell this story from my TED Talk about when I was a lawyer. I was a workaholic, 80, 90, 100-hour a week kind of situation. And I ended up in the hospital on a Saturday. Instead of being at my son's baseball game, I thought I was dying, having a heart attack. Thought I was never going to see our kids. We have 4 kids, and I never thought I'd never see him again. And I'm lying on a gurney. I got electrodes stuck all over my body. My fingers numb and tingling. I'm sweating profusely. My wife is standing behind me, just worried. And I find out from the doctor pretty immediately that I'm not having a heart attack. My heart's okay, but I'm having, and I'm sure listeners know right now, before I even say it, you can fill in the blank. I'm having an anxiety attack. I'm having a panic attack, which was new language to me then. And I had this really curious reaction because the first thing I felt was this wave of relief come over me, like nothing I'd ever experienced in my life. It was so beautiful because I knew that I was going to get to hug my kids that day, and that, all was going to be all right. And in the very next instant, like literally a flip second later, I was feeling something that was a mixture of self-loathing and shame, because I was so embarrassed at being in this lying there in this vulnerable state, this weak state. And I couldn't believe I had put my wife through what we had just been through. So it's just, it went like so rapidly from relief to sort of like, again, self-hate, really, just judgment, all that. Um, and I, that TED talk got published, and I get an email from a woman who's a CEO of a hospital. And I'm not going to use her real name, but I'm going to call her Denise for the purposes of our discussion. And Denise said to me, we must be related or something, because this just happened to me. Like, that TED talk was years later. And so she said, I would love it if you could just share with me how you came back from that, or what happened after that. And we got on a call, and I asked her. I remember my first question was, what was it like? I've been really curious about, how was it to drive up to your emergency room at the hospital that you're the CEO, and walk in with this kind of symptoms I remember having? And she like laughed and said, "Are you kidding me?" I didn't go to that hospital. I drove a long way to get to a hospital where nobody would know me. And I'm like, "Oh, sister, we really are related." And I asked her, next question, "Who have you told about this all?" Right. And she had said, of course, nobody. She had told no one. And that was my issue as well. When I got out of the hospital, I went home and hugged those kids just like I thought I would. And I refused. After that moment, my wife tried to engage me in conversation around what this had occurred, and I wouldn't talk about it at all. I refused. 2 weeks later, on a Saturday, I wasn't in my kid's baseball game that Saturday. I was in my office working, because my answer to the whole situation was, I'll just work harder. I'll, double down and make more money, and I'll find my way out of this freaking maze. And so that was my answer to it. Right. So I knew that my first advice to this lady, Denise, was that she had to have the courage to do something that I didn't. My wife would say to me, "You got to tell people, you got to talk to somebody about about your fart attack." My fake heart attack is what she used to call it. And I said that to Denise. I said, you gotta tell people. And she did. And so I won't tell the whole story. I just say she got her leadership team together and she told them, and they were compassionate, as you'd expect. And what was unexpected was the fact that when she told them that, what she had just experienced, which I had experienced that same thing, that opened up a dialogue. These are people she'd worked with for more than 10 years. And they began to tell her things about their lives that she did not know. Everything from, parents that were ill, elderly parents, kids that had problems, financial worries, health issues of their own, all kinds of stuff she did not know. Her transparency with that team created trust. And that trust was something she was trying forever to have, because it's the most important thing in a relationship. I'm married 35 years this summer. I can't, Meredith, you probably agree with this, right? Trust is everything in person. And so it was like, wow, this was like this glorious gift that occurred for her as a result of that whole scary situation. And so the first thing that we did, her and I, was to create what I now refer to as a recovery map in those four areas, the 4 quadrants: mental, emotional, physical, spiritual. I said, because we got to figure out now how you ended up in the ditch. Like, I didn't do that exploration at the time, but we're going to do it with you right now. How'd you end up there? And what are we going to change? And so I'll just very quickly tell you, her 4-blocker, her 4 quadrants of this recovery map started out with not picking up her phone first thing in the morning. She uses her phone for her alarm. She still does that. But we all know that many of us, and I ask audiences this all the time, what's the first thing you engage with in the morning? It's their phone. What's the last thing you engage with at night before you go to bed? It's their phone. You'd be surprised how many people actually have their phone in bed with them, Meredith. So, and I'm not telling anybody, so, spoiler alert, I'm not going to tell anybody to get rid of the phone. I'm not going to get rid of it. This is a question for Denise. At the time, I said to her, well, who's wagging who? Like, who's in charge here? because in your phone, which is the thing she would start looking at her text messages and her emails, et cetera, everybody else's agenda is here. This is everybody else's agenda all the time. And so my grandmother used to tell me, you start the day on the right foot. I said that to Denise. I'm like, to me, if we're going to create a new process for you, rituals for recovery, we got to start with how you begin your day, your waking ritual. And so this is, if it's not the hospital's agenda or anything to do with that, all the world's agenda is now on our phone. Every moment we look at it, we can find the troubles, the problems, the issues, the drama of everybody's life globally at our fingertips, morning, noon, and night. So what she first agreed to, and I tried to get her to go 30 minutes of the phone just in the drawer or on, off, just do not serve. She only agreed to 10. So her first commitment was 10 minutes at the beginning of the day for herself, no phone. She stopped watching the news before bed, instead was reading before bed. She was trying to catch up on the day and the world's events at night before she was trying to get rest. Two things didn't make sense. She agreed to 20 minutes of walking, not in the hospital, outside. Now that same walking ritual, which is not a sweat, you don't have to, get your heart rate going or anything. All the research, miles of paper on this is clear. 20 minutes of walking done after you eat is really impactful. Done without your phone, because we know that even when you're listening to a podcast, like I love to walk and listen to music or a podcast or something, but when I get an idea, the first thing I want to do is get on and Slack my team, or and then when I go Slack my team, I'll have to check LinkedIn, or I'll have to check my email. So this is addictive. It's intended to be addictive, and we just have to decide again, who's the tail, who's the dog, who's the cart, who's the horse. And so walking without the phone has been the ritual now. And so it goes like that. The most powerful ritual on a physical scale that I share with people is the concept of hydrating your body properly, because we're dehydrated so often, and that's what our lower back pain and neck pain comes from. More often than not, it's not structural, it's dehydration. Our brain fog that we think is a result of something is dehydration. We think we're hungry, we're dehydrated. I teach people to use legs up the wall as a process. It's just literally what you think. You lie down on the ground with your legs up the wall, and you could do it in your office. I do it in airports. I travel a lot. I do it in very interesting places, and I've done it with my door open in front of my, coworkers for many, many years at this point. And they thought I was nuts at the beginning, until I found that everybody was looking for a place to do their legs up the wall. I work with some of our clients have big manufacturing facilities, and now they have spaces they've created so that workers can do legs up the wall for 20 minutes in the afternoon, instead of grabbing coffee and running, riding the roller coaster of caffeine and sugar. They do legs up the wall. And what they found is that not only are people are happier, more engaged, the resilience levels go up as we use our tool to retest them, but they also make fewer mistakes. There's less on-the-job injuries, et cetera. All from this 20-minute process that you could do anywhere, at any time to recapture your energy.
What is that, legs up the wall?
What's that?
What is legs up the wall?
So it's literally you just basically lie down on the ground and push your tail up to the baseboard, to the wall, and your legs are vertical up the wall. You create an L shape with your body. It's a gentle inversion for people that like yoga. It will, first of all, it's great for anxiety. It helps to relieve anxiety. It helps to relieve insomnia for people that have trouble sleeping at night. You can even do it before bed, which I do sometimes. My wife and I do sometimes. It creates greater blood flow to your heart. It takes pressure off your back and off your legs. And 20 minutes of doing that, you can put something dark over your eyes and set a timer if you like, or listen to a non-sleep deep rest script, NSDR script, etc. You can use recovery. These are therapy balls, which I love, and you can put these behind your neck. You can put them in the creases of your shoulder blades to create a bit of a massage impact as well while you're doing legs up the wall. But that 20-minute exercise, which is really a do nothing, right? Again, it's not doing anything.
Yes.
Just blows the doors on any other restorative practice that I'm aware of.
Love that. Thank you. That's a great great suggestion. I haven't done that, so you can bet I'm going to be working on that. Let's talk for a few minutes about your assessment, because you look at assessing these 4 areas: the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. And it only takes, what, 3 minutes? It's a very quick assessment. And you've now had thousands of people that take it. What have you discovered as you look at the data that pops up as an area that, because I know you have green, yellow, red in terms of the scoring system, I guess. So what pops up as red for people? Are there certain ones that just really stand out?
Yeah. So I know that so people that we've assessed are all over the world, leaders and individual contributors across too many industries to count, many hundreds of companies. We've got almost 8,000 of these assessments in our data pool at this point, which is a pretty remarkable thing. And people, your listeners, if they went to rankmyresilience.com, rankmyresilience.com, they can get their own assessment in less than 3 minutes. No strings attached. All that's great. What we've been able to glean, or at least one thing I want to mention here, is that people, if given a choice, we see that people they're not taking the opportunities from quieting their mind. I know I'm not going to go off on a meditation thing. People probably heard that a lot. But I'll say this about quieting the mind, which can be stillness practice, it can be gratitude practice, it can be prayer, it can be anything. It doesn't have to be even meditation, even though meditation is wonderful. If you don't make time for quiet, you'll have plenty of time for chaos. And it's curious that very few people are making enough time for quiet during the day. We get a lot of people that have work-life boundary issues, not balance issues. We kind of call BS on this balance thing. We're not looking to create balance. Actually, we have to create harmony between work and not work.
Mhm.
We can get into that some other time, perhaps. But the boundaries between, like when we did with Denise, was we created a boundary for her that she could start her day the way she wanted to start her day, not based on everybody else's agenda. That was a boundary we created. So that's powerful. Lots of people experience that. We find that people are more often than not, this is kind of really a cool thing. Question 13 asks whether it relates to your right livelihood. It says that people are engaged in a livelihood that is in alignment with their core values and beliefs. So it sits in the spirit quadrant, that realm. That's not spirituality, by the way. It's really about our feelings inside, et cetera. And we find that people are in their right livelihood more often than not. But the very next question 14, discloses a gap, a delta between what they say is important to them and what they actually do with their time, how they allocate their time and energy. And that, again, points to a work-life harmony challenge, because they're not making actual time for the things that are important, that they say is important to them. So that's a profound takeaway that we see kind of globally, that shows up again and again. We find that there are a lot of people today that don't feel, through the response to the question, I believe question 15, they don't believe as though they're making enough difference in positive difference in the world. And given how much access we have to all that's going on and all that may be going wrong in the world today, and there's a lot of that, it's no wonder that we feel a little bit inept personally when it comes to what we're contributing to solutions. So we see that too. People aren't always feeling very enthusiastic about the beginning of the day, so they put their feet on the floor. I used to feel this real anxiousness and angst, which led me to that moment in the hospital I shared earlier. And so other people feel that way, not tremendous excitement sometimes to start the day. And that was the through line of my TED Talk, was all about how do you start your day? And in particular, can you get grounded, like really get grounded in your appreciation and gratitude for your life at the very first conscious moment of your day? And I say, like, for 12 years plus now, I've been saying 4 words when I wake up. When I put my feet on the floor now, I say, I love my life. And that is not to say my life is perfect, or that I don't have problems, because we all do. We all have adversity in our lives every single day. And I remember when that TED Talk was published, got a lot of wonderful things were said, and a lot of people viewed it. And I was also caught off guard. Frankly, I was surprised by how, there were probably hundreds of people that said, if you knew what my life was like, you wouldn't have the audacity to suggest that I should love my life. And that was really shocking, that was some of the feedback that I received from it. And I understand that. I get it. So for me, when I'm having that moment when I'm just not ready initially to feel grateful because things are tough, or I'm just, I don't know, not in the mood, or my body is hurting or something, I usually sit with my feet on the ground and I breathe, breathe consciously, pause, the pause, ask, choose method, but I pause and I ask myself, what's the experience? What are some of the other experiences people are having in the world right now? And it is instantaneous for me that I realize that there's somebody, more than one person, many people, in fact, who are going to be taking their very last breath right at that moment as I'm taking my breath. And it transforms that moment into something that is different. I would dare say it becomes sacred. And then I'm instantly drawn to the fact that I've been given something here. This is a blessing. There's an opportunity in front of me to do something powerful with this day. And that changes my attitude, like in a moment. And that's a waking ritual. That's a different way of approaching the start of the day. I know a lot of people have that difficulty beginning of the day. So those are some of the things that when we assess leaders, when we assess their teams, we're looking to aggregate data either by function or by a geography or by any number of other things, so that we can get some insights about how people are really doing. Because if you're a leader, one of the things that's toughest is to really know how people are doing. As a lifeguard, we had feedback in front of us always. If a person was struggling in the water against the rip current and getting exhausted, it was written all over their body. It was written all over their face, the panic, you could see it. And so we could be observant and then respond. But lots of leaders don't know how their people are doing for a lot of reasons we may just not have the time to get into. But to assess, to get this assessment as a tool to find out truly how are your people doing before you can even meet them where they are. You really have to know. And as we said, people are really great at keeping a lot of that stuff hidden.
So valuable. Thank you for sharing all of that. And there's one other thing I wanted to ask you about, one of the chapters around the mental aspect. And I just thought, well, this is a universal thing. This whole thing of disputing irrational beliefs, the thoughts we have that aren't true, but we think they are because we're thinking them. And so we believe that they're true. And I loved what you suggested in terms of the analysis that we do that can help us reverse that, so we don't start acting upon those irrational beliefs.
Yeah. And again, this is a perfect place for that pause and that asking, because we're often under-resourced in moments when we're feeling stress. We blame stress, but stress is actually not the issue. It's our lack of recovery from stress that is the thing that kills our performance. In stressful moments, our intelligence goes down. Again, research is clear about this. When we are highly stressed, when we're highly emotional, our IQ goes down. And I've read even by as much as 13 IQ points. That's a lot. You're losing a lot of capacity to respond intelligently to your situation when you are feeling that stress. So I just remember growing up, and my dad was a fan of somebody that coined the term rational emotive therapy, which became later on known in some respects as cognitive behavioral therapy, which is much more widely known now. But this gentleman's name is Albert Ellis, and I recommend people to any of Albert Ellis's books as well. And I started to learn about Ellis through my dad talking about things like catastrophizing, the idea that, we catastrophize things and how and he coined another phrase called masturbation, which is pretty a pretty funny thing. This is the idea that things must be different than they are, or they must be the way I want them to be. It's the sister or cousin to the shoulds.
Mhm.
And all of those things, they just create this attachment, create these expectations, create this tendency toward judgment, and all of that while we are sort of I think universally we turn that outward and we treat the world that way, we treat other people that way. It first starts within us. So all that musting and shoulding and catastrophizing and all that obsession with getting it the way we want it, and the musts, all of that judgment is first internal.
Mhm.
And that's what clogs up our capacity to think clearly, to think rightly. Um, so we have to get a handle on that. And this is it's not personal development 101. It's an upper level course. It's a graduate level course. And by the way, it's a course that never ends, in my experience. I don't care how good you are or become at it. You will be constantly called to practice it, to perform it. And ultimately, I think the quality of our lives will be very much the quality of our capacity to work on our thinking, which is also to work on what lies under our thinking, which is the subconscious, which is how in metaphysical terms, it's the heart. When we say think with your heart, or as we think within our heart, so it is that it's spiritual as well. Lots of scripture around that, but the heart is a metaphor for the kind of belief systems that we have, the kind of thoughts that we truly think at a subconscious level. And so we have to work at that level. We have to work on ourselves at that level in order to see that we're able to deal with life in a more fruitful way, in a more positive way. And again, that's ongoing work. It's like vigilance. I don't think you're ever done with it, but you can make positive progress. And when you see by performing it, you see the progress, you only gain more confidence that it's possible. And then it's a virtuous cycle, not a
Mhm.
vicious. So.
Yeah, and there's some great questions in there. There's so much that we can't cover in your book, and that's why I want to recommend that my listeners get a copy of it and really not just read it, but study it and apply so many exercises that you provide and specific ideas that to me make so much sense. They resonate because of our human condition, right? We all experience these things. It's universal. And so,
Do you have a
as,
favorite part of the book? I just wanted to ask. I want to interview you. I know you're going to be on our podcast as well, but is there a favorite part for you of the book?
one of them was what I just asked you about, because these irrational beliefs can crop up, and the more that we can become aware and conscious of them and then dispute them, I think that is just so important. And the other part that I think was one of my favorites was Dawson Church, who you spoke about at length, and what he talks about in terms of the brain continuing to be able to learn. It's not true that we reach a point in our lives where we no longer can absorb new things or change. And the meditation that he recommended to calm yourself and to recover from a specific, incident that may be happening. Those are my
I
two that
love
were
it.
put out, and just the overall theme of the ocean and how you work with it as not just the lifeguard, but as a surfer, as a swimmer. And there were just so many takeaways from reading about your own experience in dealing with the threats, the uncertainty. And I think for me, the biggest takeaway is we don't need to fight change. We can embrace it. We can see internally. There's a fellow I love, Chris Doris, who talks about none time. And this ties in with the idea of getting to a neutral place. He says, what I want is between the time something unexpected happens and I respond to it in a positive way is none time. 0 time takes place between the incident and my ability to say thank you and see it as a gift. And that is, to me, a huge takeaway from your message, because I think that's how we perform resilience, by responding in the moment. And I liked having the structure of the pause, ask, choose as a simple 3-step process that I can do at any time.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm so happy to hear that, Meredith. It's as we said probably right before we hit record, as an author, it takes a village to create something. It takes a lot of time, a lot of energy, and all that stuff. But there's also the sort of the inclination I've had to not be, to think it's not ready, to want to keep baking it, keep changing it, keep editing it, keep adding to it. At a certain point, you just got to go, it's done. It's done. I love where we ended it. And I had to detach. So again, thinking about what we just said a moment ago, that part of the process is to learn how to detach yourself from the things that we create stories around, and learning how to dispute those stories. I was a lawyer for a lot of years. Is a really powerful tool to combat those the irrational voice in your head. But first you have to recognize it. You have to see it. Mm-hmm. And when we pause, we have this grand opportunity to really to raise our consciousness in the moment to the situation. Mm-hmm. You're lying, you're in a rip current. You go, what the heck do you do if you don't fight to get to the shore and live? You're gonna drown and you're gonna die. It's like, no, not exactly. No, you can float on your back. And I say, we talk about these other alternatives in the book, but you can float on your back, and then the rip current actually spits you out, is what happens. It spits you out on the side of that current, so that you have a greater distance to get back to shore, but now you're not fighting a current. And you can also swim perpendicular to the rip current, parallel to the shore, which is another way to escape the rip current, which is counterintuitive, because you're not swimming toward the thing that you think will save you. So, there's all these really lovely nuances, and it was an absolute pleasure to produce it. My personal favorite is the ending of the book, even though I love the metaphor, I love the beginning, but I also love when we think about what the future is going to hold for ourselves, for the people in our lives, for our teams, et cetera, for our companies. I love the conversation around imagining that future and what that takes, and what the process actually is to look into the future of work and other things. And so I just so appreciate this conversation today, Meredith. Really do.
I do too. I just want to also acknowledge you, Adam, for your ability to write compelling stories and clear concepts. And it's the whole book is just a gift to the world. So I want to encourage my listeners to pick up a copy of Change Proof. And Adam, please share how they can connect with you and take that assessment. Again, we'll put it in the show notes, and get a copy of the book and anything else you'd like to share.
Oh, wonderful. Well, people that would like to know more about our organization, you can go to workwelllabs.com. And then if there are those that would want to connect with me personally or find out more about my speaking and keynotes and things like that, you just go to adammarkel.com, and either of those two places, and you can find the assessment there, as well as through that link I gave earlier. And it's just, again, what an absolute pleasure to be on your show today, Meredith.
Thank you, Adam. And thank you for the work you're doing in the world to help people become more resilient. Thanks for tuning into my podcast. Now head over to growstrongleaders.com and check out our 2 books, Connect with Your Team
and peer coaching made simple. While you're there, download the free Facilitator Guide to find out how to implement our unique peer coaching system. Until next time, I'm Meredith Bell.